Make sure you click that subscribe button below and click the notification bell. That way you'll know exactly when the next episode will drop. Hello, 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 everyone. This is season 20 of the Business Infrastructure Podcast. And again, our theme is all around small business advisors. And joining me today is none other than the podcasting pro himself, Mr. Alex Sanfilippo. Alex is the founder and CEO of PodPros. And we're going to talk all about PodPros because it's like a parent company for all kinds of other podcasting companies that he has going on. He's also a software developer, everyone. Oh, well, co-founder, right? Co-founder of a software company. Is that the better way of saying it, Alex?
Correct. My co-founder is the software developer. I can do a little bit and I'm good at like the UX side of things, but I could, if he heard this and heard somebody call me a software developer, he'd laugh hysterically. I'm more sales, marketing, getting to meet cool people like Alicia, right? Like that's more my side. And he's the actual developer himself, that my 50-50 co-founder. Let's put it that way.
Well, one thing we do have in common, aside from podcasting, is we both have a passion for processes and procedures, just those back office operations. So that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today, Alex. And we're going to focus specifically on how to leverage podcasting really as a business development tool, promotional tool for those of you who are listening or watching us right now, how you can actually become a guest on other people's shows. And Alex has a very specific process that he uses that he's going to share with us, as well as talking to us about one of those subsidiary companies that falls underneath PodPros, which is called PodMatch. But first, Alex, I want to share with everyone how you and I met, because this is funny. You're such a humble person, such a nice person. And we met, 2 months ago now at the Podcast Movement Evolutions Conference?
Yeah,
I'd say
that's right.
Month?
Yeah, it was early March 2023.
Oh gosh, it seems like it's been 2 months ago. Okay, so it's literally just been a month ago. Oh my gosh. But anyway, we met at Podcast Movement Evolutions. We had a chance to hang out, me, you, your wife, and some other really cool folks that we know in the podcasting space in beautiful Las Vegas. And I remember as we particularly started walking through the Venetian Hotel, you and I started talking and you started sharing with me your entrepreneurial journey. I'd like to start there if we can, Alex, because it's such a fascinating story. And I think it provides excellent context for where you are today and how you landed in the podcasting industry. So starting with, I think your first venture was when you were 10 years old.
Yes.
Is that right?
If you can call it a venture. Yes. Yes.
So you were a kidpreneur. So let's start there. What were you doing at 10 years old to make some side money?
Yeah. So most of the kids in the neighborhood were selling lemonade. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And started to. And I was like, well, you don't make any money doing this. There's no profit margin. I'm like, Mom and Dad, yes, they paid for the stuff, but you don't make that money back. And so in my mind, I'm like, I'm just not going to do any of this stuff. Forget it. But then one day we grew up across the street from a golf course, and all the parents of the kids' neighborhood said, don't play in the golf course. And obviously that means we're all running over the golf course as soon as we can. So we were on the golf course and there was a golf ball just sitting there. There's no golf around. So I picked it up and this golfer rides by in a car and goes, hey kid, what does that ball say on it? I was like, Titleist Pro V1. He goes, I'll give you $3 for it. So I gave him the ball and he gave me $3. And then a light bulb went off. I'm like, you can make money doing this because there's more of these in the lakes. And so all the kids that were there with me, some of my brothers, some of my neighbors, right? I was like, everyone, we're going to organize this thing. I'm like, let's do this. We're going to start digging through the lakes, through everything. We're going to find golf balls. And then we made the decision. We'll clean them up and Saturday morning we'll sell them. And each of us was making hundreds of dollars every Saturday morning. Bunch of 10, 11-year-old little kids, right? Like it was really fun. But that moment, I know it's kind of like a fun kid story, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I found something that came very natural to me. And I say that because I wasn't really very good at school. And weirdly enough, I wasn't good at video games either. My brothers were musicians and I wasn't. And I wasn't like athletic or anything like that, but I was good at this. I was good at bringing the group together of young kids who don't like to work and got them to do something. And we got a result we were looking for. And I was like, I love this. As a kid, I like grabbed that feeling and I kind of vowed even at that young age to never let it go. But more or less, that was my introduction to entrepreneurship. And yes, I wasn't paying Uncle Sam. There was no taxes. There was nothing legal about it, but it was a fun thing that really opened me up to a world that I, before that, didn't know existed.
Sure. And the the beautiful thing about that is that you found a need and you fulfill that need. There was a problem and you provided a solution to that problem, which is the crux of what it means to be an entrepreneur, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's it is simplest form. And I learned that way later, by the way, Alicia. Like that, I didn't have that revelation at that young age, but fast forward many years, I did learn that.
Okay, well, let's talk about fast forwarding many years, because you did something else, right? By the time you made it to high school when you were a teenager.
Yeah, I did a
believe
few.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a few different side hustles and stuff. Like I discovered eBay. I started like flipping things or buying things. And I did some stuff in like a technology startup actually in real estate. So I was building virtual tours of homes with a team. I had photographers, editors, like that whole 9 yards. And that one was actually paying taxes. That was a real business, right? That was my first real business, if you will. And then I don't have a whole bunch to share there because unfortunately when 2008 hit, I mean, everything I was doing at that point just went by the wayside. And because of that, I actually got into corporate. I decided, you know what, I'm going to find a company to work for. And that was like my first job, if you will, was actually as I was getting out of high school, because I was doing that job through high school, or that company. I had started that. I was doing that through all high school. And then afterwards, I just needed something. So I got into corporate and actually had a 15-year career. But loved it. I mean, I thinking like, oh, most entrepreneurs don't like to work for an organization. I had a blast. It was super fun. So that was kind of like my process of 10 to 18, 19, 20, right? Like between those years. It's all foggy when those years were, but it's all in there.
So what were you doing when you were in corporate, Alex?
Yeah, so I worked in the aerospace industry. And disclaimer, I wasn't an astronaut, I wasn't a skydiver, and I wasn't a fighter pilot. Like I wasn't any of the interesting things, right? So I worked behind a computer at a company that manufactured aircraft parts, and we focused below the atmosphere, a lot of government contracts and stuff like that. Kind of boring on paper, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so when I got started, I was a part-time receiving clerk. I mean, I just came out of we're going into a bad recession. Everything I had was now gone. So I was like, I just need anything. I need a job. Couldn't afford school, didn't have any work, right? Like my company went under that I had started. And so I got in as a part-time receiving clerk. I mean, fast forward throughout the years, I ended with my last couple of years there being on at the C-suite level, working my way up over the years. And again, that's 15 years. So I want to make it very clear. I wasn't like an overnight success at the company, but I always did apply and work hard. And I think what separated me is the fact that I still thought like an entrepreneur, even though I was working in an organization, which I believe has now been coined an intrapreneur.
Intrapreneur, that's exactly right.
Yeah. And so that's really how I operated within that organization. And I loved it. I mean, obviously I had some years that were challenging there, like you would in any organization. But when I look at the whole experience, I have nothing but fond memories of it.
So what made you leave your C-suite position? Because I'm sure you had benefits, healthcare, 401k plan. Why would you leave all of that behind, Alex, and dip your toe into the unknown?
Alicia, I've been on a lot of podcasts. No one has ever asked me the question that way. The perks were the thing that were the hardest to let go. Like I had a good paycheck and salary, don't get me wrong, but I'm like, man, they pay for everything. Like I don't even know how to pay my own phone bill. Like that's being paid for, right? Like all the things. Well, what happened is that when we hit year 13, it was a small, from an American standard, like it's considered a small to medium-sized business. And we went from just millions of dollars to at year 12 becoming a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company. And that's when I got moved up to C-suite level. Like it was really cool to be able to sit in like those rooms with people of that level. Like I was the youngest by 20 or 30 years typically. And that was a really cool thing for me to be able to learn and grow and be around those people. But something changed. When companies go public, which is the goal, so I'm not downplaying it, you can't really be an entrepreneur anymore. I was now supposed to follow the status quo because we had shareholders, we had boards, right? Like all those things. And there was a really specific moment where one of my divisions, I oversaw 5 divisions of the company, and one of them had saved a full 10% margin on a project that we've been working on forever. And I was like so excited. So I went to my CEO's office, that's who I reported directly to tell him the good news. And his response was, yeah, I saw that, but in a frustrated way. And I remember Alicia being like, hey, no, we saved 10%. Do you think we lost it? And he's like, no, I know what you did. He's like, we didn't tell the shareholders, we didn't tell anybody that this was going to happen. And we could have been selling stocks at a higher level had we said our profit margin was going to increase like that. And the last thing he said, he's like, man, I appreciate you working hard. He's like, but just don't do that again. And in that moment, I walked out of that office, and my office wasn't far down the hall, but it felt like I was walking for an hour. And in my head, I was just like, you know what? This isn't for me anymore. Like, this is just not going to be what I do long term. And at that moment, I want to give this important point. I applied myself to the last day I was there because I believe the way you end one season is the way you begin the next. And I left on a really good foot. And that was important to me. So I didn't stop applying myself and start slacking and things like that. I worked my hardest till the day I left. But that was the moment. And it took 3 years to figure that out. But that's the moment I said, you know what? I think it's time for me to go. I think it's time to return to my roots of entrepreneurship. And that was the decision I made at that moment on that, what felt like a long walk back to my office.
Wow. And I'm asking this purely out of curiosity. Was the CEO, once the company went public, was the CEO the same person before the company went public, or did they bring in someone new, or was someone within promoted to the CEO position?
It's a good question. Actually, it was the vice president. So, the vice president, the former CEO left. That person got moved up, and I was a senior director that got moved to C-suite. So he moved up, I kind of moved up, right? So followed him. And actually, I loved working with the guy. He was I'd say easily the best boss I ever had. Like, great guy. Loved working with him. Like, felt like he made me a much better leader in the organization.
Yeah, but to your point, Alex, things do change once a company goes public, because you are beholden to the shareholders, right? And so that kind of drives a lot of the decisions, a lot of the activities. And so things that would have once been applauded and lauded are no longer, to your point, when it comes to being an entrepreneur. So, okay, you make that decision over a 3-year period. You're kind of weighing the pros and cons of leaving, and then you ultimately decide to leave. What do you do next? Or had you started making some type of a transition before you officially left your corporate job?
Side hustles. That's what I was doing. I was trying to, here's the thing, after 12 years doing the same thing, right? Like, you learn all these different skills, but you don't really know what you want anymore. And I think that entrepreneurship that's successful has to start from a place of passion. I didn't know what that passion was. So I was trying a bunch of different things, and like all kinds of things, just because I was curious. I mean, I was just an interested individual of like, what's out there? I have a good, stable job. I'm doing well at it. I'm not miserable at it. I just know it's not for me forever. So let me try some things. And like all good entrepreneurs, Alicia, I had like a ton of failures along the way, right? Like a bunch of things that just didn't work. And clearly a closed door just means there's a better one open somewhere else. And so I just kept on looking for that. And finally, I actually realized, I was like, maybe I'm not good at this entrepreneurship thing. Like, I have found nothing. And so that's what brought me to podcasting. I started a podcast, and now I think this is brilliant. Back then, I don't think I knew what I was doing, but I started a podcast to talk to people who had successfully left a 9-to-5 job to become a full-time entrepreneur, to ask them what that transition was like and how they did it. And I was going to bring people with me. It was going to be like a public conversation, right? I was learning for me, but also for to bring other people along in that journey. And I mean, no spoiler alert here. Like, I actually figured it out through learning from these other individuals. And the crazy thing that happened, though, is I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. But when I got into this podcasting thing, I realized almost immediately what I wanted to do was podcasting. And that's ultimately what led me making the leap into being a full-time podcaster, if you will.
So you start the podcast, but then eventually you start PodPros, right? Or did they happen at the same time?
So no, I started podcasting, and I didn't take my individual show full time, but I started with just one company, PodMatch, which we referenced. So I started with just that. And as soon as we started that, like, the writing was on the wall that, like, okay, it looks like I'm going to become a software entrepreneur guy, right? Like, it was just on the wall almost immediately, which I'm very thankful for. Again, I don't want to sound like an overnight success, because I learned this over years to figure out like how to do this and stuff like that. But yeah, that's ultimately what led me to making that shift.
Okay, so you started your own podcast, and this was what, like in 2020, or?
It was earlier than that.
Okay, I was looking at when you started PodMatch. PodMatch started in 2020.
Correct. So, yep, I had the idea on March 10th, 2020, and on June 15th, 2020 is when we launched. In my podcast, I think all the years get fuzzy, Alicia, but I think it was a year and a half before that.
It's COVID brain, man. That's what it is.
Yeah, I started the show in 2019 or 2018, maybe. It was one of those years. I'm sorry for not knowing firmly.
No, it's okay, because you're right. I have great difficulty. The way I think of things now is pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Because 2020, 2021, it's like all one long year, and everything is fuzzy.
Right. Well, I'm glad I'm not alone then. So that's good.
No, not at all. Like, that's an actual thing, COVID brain.
Right.
So you start PodMatch. what led you to starting PodMatch? Because I'm sure as you started interviewing other people, and kind of, as you said, other people who've left their 9-to-5 jobs successfully, and you're learning from them, and they've also started their own businesses. It sounds like you probably started to notice some patterns, some trends. What was it that you saw, or what was it that you heard, Alex, that led you to start PodMatch? And tell us, what exactly is PodMatch?
Yeah, so I'll start with what led me there. And it's something that you actually mentioned earlier that I think most, like I said, like as a 10-year-old, I didn't understand, but like how to be an entrepreneur. And I'm going to way oversimplify this because that's not what we're talking about here today. And all credit due to the hundreds of people I interviewed that helped me learn this. But basically, there's 4 things. One, you find an area of passion, and then you get into that community within that passion, right? So you dive into the community. So for me, I started speaking at podcasting conferences because I became passionate about being a podcaster. I got into the community, started speaking at the events. The third thing is to find the most simple problem that they're struggling with. And the final thing is to offer the fastest, simplest solution to that problem. So those 4 steps, find the area of passion, get in the community, find the problem, offer a solution to the problem, is how I built out PodMatch. And I struggled with the problem. So I'll get into what it is in just a second here. I struggled with the problem because I was a corporate guy looking to interview entrepreneurs. I didn't know entrepreneurs. So I struggled trying to find those guests, and I always had them in my mind. And thankfully, that show did very well because apparently I wasn't alone in wanting to do that. So I was able to find guests somewhat easy after the first, I'd say 8 months. It got a lot easier. But before that, I really struggled. But now I'm back in this community and they're all telling me, Alex, I'm having trouble finding ideal guests for my show. And I realized that's the problem. So I went to the whiteboards and I was like, you know what? Dating apps do this really well. People are having trouble finding dates. So what PodMatch is a software that automatically connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. It bases on like things you're interested in, stuff like that, right? Like, and what you can talk about, what they're looking for, all that works just like a dating app, but instead of connecting for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. And that's exactly what we set out to build. And like I said, we started on March 10th, and on June 15th, we released that into early beta to the people who said they were struggling with it. And rest is kind of history at this point.
And I mentioned earlier when I was introducing you, Alex, about you being so incredibly humble. When you and I first met in Vegas, and Christina Barcy, shout out to Barcy.
Love
when
Barcy.
She introduced us to each other. You were like, yeah, so I'm curious, Alicia, are you ever a guest on other people's shows? How do you find these podcasts? And I was like, oh, I use these different services, and I have my assistant Erica helps me. And you were like, yeah, have you ever heard of PodMatch? And I was like, yeah, I think that is something that we use, not knowing that you were the founder and CEO of PodMatch. So this is what I mean, everyone, when I say how humble Alex is. Here I am talking to the founder and CEO of a company that we certainly use to help me get the word out about business infrastructure and also help cross promote our podcast. And so that's just another really quick funny story. But
thanks for sharing that. I love that.
But listening to your 4 things that the way you distilled the lessons that you learned about entrepreneurship down to those 4 key points, I couldn't help but think, this is what you figured out at 10 years old, though, Alex. You had a passion for not listening to the adults, not going, they told you not to go to the golf course. You went there anyway.
We're going.
You found, there was a simple problem. You found a solution, and you provided that solution. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that's cool. I've never had that gap bridge. Yeah, I love that.
You had it come back full circle there. So, okay, you start PodMatch, and we are actually going to take a deeper dive into PodMatch because that's what we want to focus on today, is teaching other entrepreneurs and small business owners, again, who are listening to us, watching us right now, how they can leverage being a guest on a podcast as a viable tool to promote their businesses, their services, their goods, whatever it is that they want to talk about, and it gives them a platform. But before we get into that, you have some other business ventures as well within the podcasting space. So can we talk a little bit about those as well? So again, PodPros is like the parent company, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's PodMatch, there's Pod Lottery. Want to tell us a little bit about Pod Lottery?
Sure. And by the way, the parent organization, I don't know if it's brilliance or laziness, but when we launched PodMatch, then we launched some other stuff. And my team was like, oh, okay, well, now we need a blog for each of these, and we need social media for each of them as well. I was like, absolutely not. We're going to rebrand as PodPros, and we're going to only have one blog, one podcast, and one set of social media accounts, and everything will just be under it. So
Good
listen,
for you.
business infrastructure, you're like the face of that. And the fact that you just gave me a thumbs up means I'm doing something right. So thank you. So yeah, so Pod Lottery, I realized, again, going back to that whole framework of, okay, like I'm passionate about podcasting. I'm in that community. What do they struggle with? Like we solved the main pain point I could find. But the next thing I saw was that podcast hosts were having trouble getting reviews on their show. Even though we ask on the show, and like I'll even tell it now, if you're listening to this and you've not left a review on Alicia's show, please go do that. That goes such a long way. Not just so we can see the number. It actually doesn't help with ranking at all. Apple has publicly said that, but it helps us know that, you know what, we're actually reaching somebody. All this hard work we put in, this labor of love, is actually worth it. So pause for a minute, go leave that review, and then come back and continue. Anyway,
we were that, Alex.
Of course, yeah. We just saw it being such a problem that we decided to build something so that podcast hosts could leave each other reviews. So there's no podcast listeners on there. It's just host to host. And we actually worked directly with Apple, and Apple liked it so much they gave us access to everything. So we can validate a listen and an integrity-based review. Doesn't mean it's 5 stars. It just means you're getting a review that someone actually thought about, because we know they also listen to the show. And that's just a way so we can start showing people that are listening to the show that have no access to analytics and data that there's actually somebody else listening, right? Because when you go look at a show and it has 0 reviews, you're like, oh, am I the first person to find it? Like, for whatever reason, we're all conditioned. I think it's probably like the Amazon and Googles of the world that just show that like big reviews and reviews matter, right? And there's nothing wrong with them, but people like to see that. And we wanted to help people have that extra layer of confidence in themselves, but also to show people, hey, someone else has listened to this show already. And that's why we built that out. Just kind of a fun thing. It's totally a free service. We'll never charge for it or anything like that. It's there just to serve the community of podcasters. And I actually think it's super fun personally. I love discovering new shows that way.
Absolutely. And okay, so there's also podcast SOP. And I remember when you first told me about this back in Vegas, we had a chuckle about it, because you told me that a lot of times when some people see the name of that company, they call it podcast SOP, because they don't realize that SOP stands for standard operating procedure.
Yes, I've also heard podcasts OP. I'm like, no, standard operating procedures. And by the way, Alicia, at some point, I already have the domain picked out that someone's already using, but if their company doesn't work, I'm going to buy their company so I can own the domain. I named it the wrong thing, unfortunately, but yeah, you live, you learn. So yeah, right. Podcast SOP is project management software specifically for podcasters, because I realized that was a big pain point. People were stopping podcasting because they were overwhelmed and stressed. So immediately I said, hey, use Asana, use Trello, use Monday.com. And what I didn't realize I was doing is, if you don't have experience with those things, they do 20,000 different things. Nothing against them. They're amazing for what they are. But if someone's already feeling overwhelmed, you just took that overwhelm through the roof. So we built something at the rawest, most simple form to basically help podcast hosts release their episodes on time through, lack of a better term, a glorified checklist that they create that automatically populates and assigns team members, allows them to comment and do all the things, right? It does everything right there that you need to do just for your podcast, and it doesn't do anything else. And we built it really simple like that on purpose.
And it's really cool. We've kind of played around with it already so far with our team here at the Business Infrastructure Podcast. Now let's circle back if we can, because I know you also have Pod Talks, but maybe we can mention that toward the end. But let's circle back to PodMatch. So I'd like to share this with you, Alex. There have been times when there are people that I personally know in my personal network who are phenomenal at what they do. And I would love for them to be a guest on the show. And they clam up. They won't do it. And it used to puzzle me, because these are people who are very active on social media. They have no problem, getting on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you name it, and typing out some things, sharing pictures of themselves. So I was really baffled, like, why is it they won't come on the show and do a podcast interview? And then I thought about it. Podcasting is really a form of public speaking. And when it's out there, right, Alex? It's out there forever. And I think the thought of that scares a lot of people. Can you speak to that a little bit for those who are listening and don't realize the power, or maybe they do realize the power of podcasting, and they've just been they've had some form of trepidation about becoming a guest on other people's shows, or they probably just don't even know how to even begin. And we're going to get into that. But yeah, can you first just speak to, this fear that some people might have of being a guest in the first place?
I actually think that it is really valid. And the reason being is because social media and podcasting / public speaking are very different things. I always compare podcasting to public speaking because you're not just getting a quick like or download, right? That's technically what happens in the background, but somebody's listening to your voice. And so I always say it's not any different than people sitting in seats listening to you, watching you. Podcasting has that same authority and power. And although people can't articulate why it makes them nervous, that's why. It's because social media, you kind of hide behind somebody double tapping and leaving a little comment, right? And by the way, social media has its place. I'm not trying to like downplay its authority and power and stuff. It's just different. They're not the same. And so I think it is far more like public speaking. At the same time, there's a lot, you can have a lot less, but it'd be a lot more powerful. 100 likes on a picture for some people is like, okay, that's awful, right? Or like in general, no one's like, oh, wow, this person has a massive following, right? And unfortunately, that's just how we're conditioned when it comes to social media. But if you have 20 people listening to your podcast, it's the same as 20 people sitting in seats listening to you. I have not met very many experts that I told them, hey, I've got 20, 30, or 40 people in the next room who want to hear you talk. Do you want to do that? They, again, if they have experience public speaking, like, yes, you have my audience there. They're ready. I'll be there 7 days a week if I need to come speak to those people. Again, that's the difference in the power of it. If somebody's not used to public speaking, then it's going to freak them out quite a bit. But if you are a public speaker, I'm telling you, podcasting is an extension of that if you're not leveraging, I think you're leaving a lot on the table by not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Can you also just give maybe some pointers for people, again, who may have never considered becoming a guest on a podcast? Can you speak to the promotional side of it as well? Because there's different types of podcasts. There's some that are more educational, some that are really geared toward you specifically promoting a particular service, a particular product. Can you speak to that a little bit, Alex?
Yeah, to me, so podcasts are not created equal, just like anything, right? Like you have to think about which platform is going to be best for you based off what it is that you share. And so again, I see a lot of people, Alicia, that they're like, I want to get on 100 podcasts this year. I'm like, okay, that's great. What 100 podcasts? The ones that'll have me. I'm like, I don't know if that's going to be valuable for you. Like it seems like you might be wasting a little bit of your time. And I'm not trying to be rude or mean, but wouldn't you rather be on the 10 best podcasts for you? The ones that have your listener listening, the person you can actually serve? Figuring that out before you even get started, I find to be extremely important because I see people get burned out on podcasting all the time. Public speakers will come in and be like, wow, I got booked on 150 podcasts. It's because you're a good speaker, but only 10 of them were good, right? Like the right one for you to be on. Why did you need to go on those other 140 and burn yourself out, right? Like I think we have to be more focused on, okay, what is the value I add to who and who has that audience? Along with that, I don't think we need to look at size. I think that can have some importance, but it doesn't matter. They don't all need to be podcasts with millions of people listening. Because again, think about it. It's people sitting in seats. How often have anyone spoken in front of millions of people, right?
Right.
Probably hasn't happened very much if I have to guess, right?
Right.
So you just think about like, okay, who is it that I'm actually serving? And those are the ones that you go for. I don't know if that directly answers the question. If not, let's continue framing it. But okay.
It does, absolutely, because I think what you're doing, Alex, is you're kind of setting a foundation for these are some of the things that you first need to think about and think through before you start approaching different podcasts. You have to kind of do your homework, right? And part of doing your homework is also coming up, making sure you have a really solid bio, great headshot, because oftentimes a podcast host will ask for your headshot so that they can create custom cover artwork, they can create beautiful YouTube thumbnails, basically all of these promotional assets that they want to use to help cross promote you and your goods and your services. And
that is also so important. Yeah, sorry. Here's the thing. You will save 14 emails back and forth if you have some sort of one sheet, as we call it in the biz, which is all the details. So instead of a host saying, can I get a picture? Can I get a bio? Is this your social media? Is this your other social media? Is this your tagline? Is this your book? You have all that already and say, here's everything you need. And having that in some digital format, I see what you're talking about now. That is so important. And it helps people understand the host. Who is this person actually able to serve? Because now you've shown them. Doing that practice will help you figure out who you serve as well. So I'm a huge proponent of that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. And really what we're talking about is kind of these different elements of business infrastructure, right? And so for those who are listening, watching for the first time, business infrastructure is really just a system for linking your people your processes and your different tools and technologies together so that you can scale your efforts in a profitable, sustainable, and repeatable way. So what we're talking about right now really centers around some of those different tools and processes that you need to get in place before you use a tool like PodMatch to find the people. So going back to the one pager, you mentioned the importance of having your social media handles, if you have any. I would imagine your website, your email address, basic contact information about yourself, maybe even your bio, your short bio, Alex. What else? What else would you recommend be on that one sheet?
So I like the short bio because here's the thing. If you're not a guest on podcasts right now, you'll realize this. The host is going to ask, or sorry, they're going to read whatever you put as a bio, more or less, right? Alicia is a pro, so Alicia goes off script, which I love. But most people I go on their podcast, they're going to just read it word for word.
They're reading it.
Yes.
Alex Sanfilippo is the founder and
you made one mistake there already. People don't know how to say my last name. They don't practice it. So like Alex, oh shoot. Alex Guy is anyway. So yeah, you want that bio to be really powerful and short. I think a lot of people, they get it wrong. They think it's a spot for credentials. I mean, if you can make it a sentence or two, that's great. Because here's the thing, like no one wants to hear a 20-minute intro on somebody. It's like, oh my gosh, just tell me something of value, right? So right. That's on there. All your links. The other thing I like to have is a call to action, your desired call to action. Because again, at the end, the host is going to say, where can listeners find out more about you? What I've seen happen is when you don't give them that up front, and I like this to be on the one sheet because they'll say it wrong by mistake. And they don't mean to, but they just heard you say it for the first time. So if you say, hey, go to alicia.com, right? They might be like, yeah, go to alicia.com because they just didn't quite hear it. But if you give that to them up front, they're going to do it correctly and be able to reinforce it better. So I like having your call to action, not just a link, but also a little description so they know what they're getting into. Aside from that, two more things I like that I have found very helpful is to give hosts idea for titles of the episode. So like, what can this episode be about? If you can give them something, they're like, this could be what we talk about in the title of it. Hosts love that because they're like, wow, you're doing my job for me. Yes, we're going to talk about that right there. And you give me a title to prove it. And the other thing right along with that is questions that you're ready to be asked. And it's not just where did you grow up, right? Like that's don't give yourself those like softball questions. No, get into something that's like, wow, I'm the only one who knows how to answer this question really well. And I'm going to go ahead and put that there. Most hosts won't read it word for word, but they will try to work that in. The reason I like having those two things in there is you're now giving the host a direction you want the conversation to go. If you give them nothing, they will go wherever they feel like going. And you might get to the end and be like, wow, we talked about surfing the whole time. That's just one of my little hobbies, but they found a picture of me surfing on social media, so they went there. No, if you say, hey, here's what I'm ready to talk about, they're going to follow that direction that you give them without sounding robotic.
Great point. Great point. So again, laying kind of those foundational things in place, having that one pager, making sure you have all of those different pieces and components of what makes a successful one pager. So you have your one pager, you've given some thought to the types of podcasts that you would like to be a guest on. Now comes PodMatch.com. And what I'd like to do at this point, Alex, is I'm actually going to pull up PodMatch. And can you see this?
Sure can.
Okay. So walk us through this. So again, there are those who are watching this on video and have the benefit of actually being able to see this. But for those who are listening to the audio only, let's just kind of make sure that we are as descriptive as possible as we talk through. A person coming here to podmatch.com wants to be a guest on other people's shows. And as you mentioned, this is the dating app for podcast hosts and guests, matchmaking service. What should they do first?
The very first thing you're going to do, if you scroll down just a little bit, Alicia, you'll see 3 buttons. It says, I'm a podcast host, I'm a podcast guest, or I'm both. And you're just going to go ahead and self-identify which one are you. And you can always add another one later. So if you're like, I'm a podcast guest, but maybe I want to show later on, you can add that. But yeah, you're just going to go ahead and click one of those. And you're going to get straight into a very simple registration form is the first thing you're going to do. So let's just, Alicia, we'll just continue with the guest side of things. That's the one you clicked on here. So like as a guest, we'll go ahead and go into that. So that's the very first thing you're going to do is you're just going to fill out some basic information. One weird question we have on there, which I think is fun, is we have enter your birth year. And it's because there's built-in messaging on the platform. And we, from a legal perspective, we're advised to not let 17-year-olds talk to 45-year-olds. So it's 18 and up because there is a feature where you actually are chatting back and forth. And again, this is not for a date; it's for a podcast interview. But I don't want a phone call ever. Let's put it that way. So yeah, so it's all, yeah, you're not going to be connecting with any like kids trying to podcast or anything like that. It is all like adults podcasting. So that's my only weird question, the whole thing. But Alicia, past this screen, which we won't dive into here, but past this screen goes straight into you actually building out that one sheet we talked about. So if I do recommend doing the practice before you even start, and you can look at Alicia's page to see what that looks like if you wanted to. But the idea is it's going to direct you through, okay, what's your tagline? Here's some pictures that you need to upload. Okay, what's questions you're ready to be asked? What's something that you are passionate about, like it's from a topic standpoint? It's going to go through each and every little piece of this. And at the end of it, you have what you can use as a publicly facing, so people don't have to only be on PodMatch, digital one sheet that you can share with anybody. And many of our members, yes, they're on PodMatch, but when they're working with people to get speaking gigs, they send them their public facing PodMatch profile, and we call it their one sheet. So again, it has all that data they need, and someone doesn't have to be a member to see that. And so that's kind of how it goes through that whole process. If you have it already, I say it takes you about 6 to 8 minutes to be able to sign up. If you don't have it ready, it could take you 20 minutes because it's going to ask you questions that you might not be ready to answer. But in general, it'll take you just the amount of time. But either way, it's a great practice. And we regularly get compliments on how helpful this is for people to hone in what they're actually trying to do with podcasting from a guest perspective.
That's amazing. So once you build out your profile, well, you register for the account, you build out your profile. What happens next? Do you then start searching for other hosts, or does the service just automatically start to make suggestions?
Basically, it runs through an AI and it's fairly quick. Some people are a little fast, so they get there to the dashboard, which is where you'll land before it finishes calculating some matches. But for most of us, it will already give you a set of matches. So at like the top navigation of the website, which I don't know if you have a logged in version of this, Alicia, we could look at. If not,
I do actually. Let me just quickly look up my password here, because this might also be a great time for us to talk about the people element of business infrastructure, because when you and I first met, Alex, I was like, I know PodMatch, but why can I not see it in my head right now? And it's because my assistant is the person who actually helps me quite a bit. And so for those who are listening and are thinking, gosh, this sounds like a great service, but I just don't think I would have the time to keep up with all of that, considering all of the other things I have going on. Just, do like I do. I have someone who helps me, and she has the login credentials, and she's able to respond very quickly, because Alex, as you and I both know, also that's also huge. That's just good business etiquette in general, right? Is to be as responsive as you possibly can. And you, my friend, are incredibly responsive. I don't know how you do it. It's very impressive. Even if you just send Alex a regular email, I mean, he's responding definitely within 24 hours.
That is my goal. So yeah. And by the way, I'm glad you brought that up about having like an assistant or team member help with running PodMatch. We're all for that. We actually put it in the FAQ because it was so commonly asked, hey, can I have an assistant run this? I don't want to do it, or I don't have the time to. That's perfectly fine. Best practice, I always say, just don't try to be like, if you're the assistant, don't try to act like you're the other person. Just straight up say, hey, I'm here representing Alex. I work directly on his team. He mentioned that he wanted to potentially be on your podcast, that type of thing, right? Like go that one. That's not the pitch I would say to use. However, it's fine to say that you are not the person that you're representing. I see people do it both ways, but I think it tends to go better that opposite way, if you will, of you just saying, hey, I'm here representing so-and-so. So right. I think it works pretty well that way.
And that's definitely what Erica does. She's always, very transparent and upfront about the fact that she represents. Now, something else that I should point out, she recently, and I think this was a match made via PodMatch with the host. And he said, whenever there's an assistant, unless the only reason he decided to interview me was because he realized that Erica is a full-time person who works exclusively for Equilibria. But he said, all of these other people who are out there and they represent several different people. He was like, it's just never worked out in the past. So that's just something else to consider is there are some services where they're like pod matchmaking services, right? But they represent several people, and sometimes they can confuse their clients sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that's what this guy was getting at. And funny enough, I thought I had the password and the login information for PodMatch. So I've sent Erica a quick message to send that to me.
If not, I can log into mine if that's
okay,
helpful.
yes, let's do that. And I'll stop sharing my screen, and you can certainly feel free to share yours.
Yep. All right. By the way, I have no problem with those other services. I just say be careful when you're doing generic pitching. And maybe we could even talk about pitching a little bit, but that's the problem with them. People get frustrated because they're like, they're like, you clearly you don't know what my podcast is. You don't know my name. You clearly sent this to everybody on the planet. And we're just finding that's not working anymore. So no, not throwing any shade their way. Those services are great. You just have to be careful.
And
so
it's insulting to us as hosts, right? When you haven't when it's clear that you haven't done your homework.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's the dashboard is what we're looking at now. So for anybody who's not watching this, basically there are 3 main menu items at the top. One says matches, and I currently have 6 of them. And there's an explore page, and that's just where you can do one-on-one searching if you're like looking for something really specific that you would never even match with. And the last one's messages. And the reason we have messages built in is we wanted to basically factor out emails. So if you don't want to email, you don't actually have to. The idea is you can message back and forth. You can schedule right from within PodMatch. You can find people's profiles. You can do all of it from right there. So if you don't want to exchange an email, you never have to. And that was one of our goals because on average, we found people were actually sending 14 emails back and forth to figure out the whole podcasting thing. And now there is 0 if you want it to be that way. So for me, I don't exchange emails when you're coming on my show. It's only through PodMatch. And I've made it exclusive. I'm like, listen, people hit me up. I probably get 40 to 50 pitches a week to be on my show. And we have an automatic response. It's not even me anymore. It says, hey, message Alex through PodMatch or you're not getting on the show. And people have been like, I'm a huge name. What are you talking about? And they're like, sorry, no exceptions, because it just takes too much time. And then I've got to do all this extra homework because you don't have a one sheet and it's just not worth it to me anymore. So I'll pass on the big guest. Anyway, I digress. So the first thing you're going to see is the matches. I'm going to click that real quick. And what's going to do is immediately open up your very next match. And then you'll take action. There's 4 different options at the top. 5 actually. Sorry, there's message, maybe later, which will just make it come back up in a later session, like a later match. There's pass if it's just clearly not a fit. Previously interviewed if you ever did an interview before and it was off of PodMatch, and then a little pin feature. So if you just are like, I want to look at this person later, you can pin it and add a little note to it. But this is somebody that I'm not going to go through and read all now, but this is the one sheet. So it's got their picture. They also have a video pitch, which is really nice because you know how they're going to show up. You can kind of see their scenery, how they talk and things like that. It's got their long descriptions. They can kind of go in their story. It's got some guest details to tell you like where you align and where you don't. Some tags because so many people don't like to read. You know, we're podcasters. So we got tags so you can just quickly get a snapshot of who they are, their approved images, their bio, their desired call to action, their social media links, their website links, a link to their podcast if they have one, ideas or main focus for the episode, questions they're ready to answer, and then previous like spots they're previously a guest. So you can go and check out episodes they've been on previously if you want to listen to them, which I always recommend doing. Anyway, that's all the things. And I'd love to just like take action on this, but I'm actually probably going to read this person looks like a really great guest. So I'm not going to move on from here, but you get the idea. I would take action and immediately roll into the next one. And that's kind of how it works. And then we don't need to dive too deep in the messages probably because it gets really administrative, but basically on the side, I'm currently waiting so whoever receives the message initially has to choose if it's a match or not. So I sent the original request to this individual. And so they have to say, okay, yes or no. And from there, you can do scheduling and all that. And they can access your host calendar and all the things. And that is like, I guess to summarize, that's how it works.
And may I say, the user interface is so clean.
Thank you.
So user-friendly. So great job, Alex,
Thank
to
you
and your team.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah, we're getting ready to upgrade one part of it in the messages. Actually, it's almost gonna feel like an AI holding your hand through the whole process on either side of it, just to make it even easier. So there's just not even a second of thought. You know exactly what your next step is, and we're excited to roll that out pretty soon. Because again, we're trying to take the administrative functions out of it, right? Not because we don't love administration, but because like let's just get this interview happening, right? Like that's where the magic's at. Let's make it happen.
Right, exactly. Well, this is phenomenal, and I wish we had even more time because we're already almost at the top of the hour. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. You've already dropped so many nuggets, right? Of and pearls of wisdom of things that entrepreneurs should consider when it comes to becoming a guest on different podcast shows. Is there any other parting words of advice that you'd like to share, Alex?
Yeah, I'll share two things if that's okay.
Of
Uh,
course.
Number one, podcasting. I'm wearing a shirt that says these words, so it's kind of funny. But podcasting as a guest is all about leading with value. You want to make sure that when you do get there, everything from the pitch you're sending the host to be on the podcast, if you find a way to lead off with great show, I love this episode, I left you a review on your show, that's going to be what gets you on the show. What's going to get you some buy-in from the listeners is you leading with value as you talk. Be willing to lay it all out there, give it all away, everything you possibly can. And that's what causes listeners to engage with you as the guest. And past that, the other thing that I'll share is it's all about consistency. You can't just go on 3 shows and say, I didn't get anything from it, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's about finding a cadence that works for you. So for me, I try to go on 2 podcasts a week, and I'm going to do that every single week. And by doing that, I find over time that results happen because I stay consistent. So again, lead with value, remain consistent if this is going to be one of your strategies. And I believe you'll see some really great results over time with it.
And it's such a great way, especially if you have the opportunity to educate as you are guesting. Educate meaning you're explaining how things work and not just solely focusing on promoting your specific product or service. But to your point, Alex, you talked about PodMatch, but you're really explaining and educating us on how to be a great guest and what the benefits are of being a guest on a podcast. That's the real value there, right? And so that alone is going to naturally draw people to you, and they're going to want to know more about you and how they can connect with you. I'm glad you brought that up because I just had a conversation this morning with someone, and she said, I just don't see the point in being a guest on a podcast. And I was like, wow, you need to listen to this interview with Alex Sanfilippo. And
I love that. Thank you. To reinforce that point real quick, I got to mention this. I was listening to your podcast because I'm one of your listeners. It was episode 251 where you interviewed a guy named Todd, and he was talking about
yes, Todd
tips for effective team building. And something they said is that transparency in communication is a double-edged sword. And you really reinforce that point. And I find that to be so true. When you're a guest on a podcast, be transparent. If you're educating, just do your best to not be like the lead educator, right? You're just trying to help. And I love that episode. It really spoke to me with the way that I show up even on podcasts, because when you do that, it goes so well. So I just wanted to mention, first off, great job on the show. I absolutely love it. But also, it's so important to make sure that we're communicating with transparency because it just goes such a long way.
Absolutely, Alex. And as we start to wrap up here, thank you for sharing everything about all of your different business ventures. As people are, again, listening to us, watching us, they may be thinking, I still need maybe a little bit more guidance on putting together that one sheet, or I need a little bit more help. Do you have any tutorial videos? Or I'm sure there's some things on PodMatch. Are there any kinds of blog posts or resources that they can go to learn more about just getting those foundational things in place before they even register for an account with PodMatch?
Yes, and I recommend doing that before you get on there. And so I've got a really easy place that you can find that. If you go to podpros.com/win, podpros.com/win, it give you 5 quick wins that you can read in less than 5 minutes for being a podcast guest. Or if you already are a podcast guest, they'll have things there for you as well. I don't want your email address or anything like that, but I think that it would be extremely helpful as a next step for you on that journey to becoming a more of a podcast guest or just getting started with it. But that's podpros.com/win. You can check that out there.
Okay. And that will take us to some different articles and things like that to read.
Yeah, give you 5 quick wins. It's just
5
like I kind of like little bullet points. It'll have some extra spaces for you to go, but it'll have everything that you're looking for on the guesting side of things.
Okay. Well, Alex, this has been fantastic. Sadly, we have to wrap it up. I know you have to get going, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can do a part 2 because our next season is actually going to feature AI. And I know you mentioned there's an AI component to some of the software technologies that you have in place. So maybe that would give us a reason to be able to do this again.
Hey, any excuse we can find to spend time together, Alicia, I'm all in for. So even if it's something I know nothing about, we'll both pretend.
And please give my best to your wonderful wife, Alicia, because she was also phenomenal. And I really enjoyed speaking with her and learning more about all of the exciting things that you all have going on at PodPros. So kudos to you, Alex. You've made significant strides in this podcasting industry in such a short time. You're well respected, well known, and if there's anything that I can do, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Oh, thank you again. And seriously, just an honor. I love your show. So it was such an honor to get to be here today. So thank you again for that.
Thank you, Alex. Be sure to click the link in the description box below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so that you'll know when our next episode drops. Until then, keep operating smoothly.